Hi, this is Kevin Gong, and this is my chess tutorial video on queen versus pawn endings. So I'm going to start here with a simple position where the black king is far away from the pawn. So this is really easy. You just bring your queen over and take the pawn, and from there the rest should be easy. Okay, so that was really easy. So let's take another example where the black king is closer. So if you did the same thing, say you brought the queen to d4 or to a4, then black can move the king next to the pawn and protect it. So there's different techniques you can use here, but one technique is to separate the king from its pawn. So if you move the queen to the b file, the black king can never protect the a file pawn. So then you can just bring your king all the way around and capture the pawn. Okay, and from there the rest is easy. So let's take another example where the black king is already next to the pawn. Okay, so you can't use that same trick. So again, there's different ways of doing this, but one technique to learn is to simply try to get your queen in front of the pawn. So anywhere on the b file in front of that pawn. So obviously you can just move your queen up here. Now once you do that, the black king can never get can never get next to your queen. Obviously it can't move in a check, so it can't move the queen, and the pawn can never get past it. So you can now just move your king up the board. You have nothing to worry about. Okay, and then eventually you can get your king in front of the pawn, and then attack it with your queen as well, and then take it. Okay, so that's a good technique to know. So let's look at a harder example. So in this case, the black pawn is on the 6th rank. It's only 2 squares away from becoming a queen. But you can use the same basic technique of trying to get your queen in front of the pawn. So in this case, you can move it down to c1, and then on the next move it to e1. Okay? Now, once it gets there, again, black can't do anything to move it out of the way, and the black pawn is just stuck. So black is just going to move his king back and forth down here, and you can slowly move your king down the board and eventually drive it away, and then take the pawn. And the rest is easy. Okay, so let's look at the case where the pawn's on the 6th rank, but it's a rook pawn. And in this case, you can't get your queen to that same square. You can't get it to the queening square. So it's a little bit different here, but you can still win. Okay, so you never want to let black move that pawn one step closer. If black is able to do that, then it will probably be a draw. So you want to keep checking the black king, okay, until you can force black's king next to the pawn. Okay. Now black has blocked his own pawn, which is good. And then you can do basically a tempo move. Now you're moving the king not to actually get it closer, but this is a tempo move because you're forcing black into a bad move. Because the only move he can make now, because he's at b2. Now if he were at a1, he can move the pawn, but since he's at b2, or sorry, a2, he can only move to a1, and then you just take the pawn. Okay. So again, let's go back to this position here. There. Oops, there. So basically you want to reach this position, make a tempo move with your king, and then take the pawn. And you don't want to do the same thing when the king is on a1. Um, if you move your king, he'll just move the pawn up, and it'll probably be a draw. Okay, so that's the position you want to get to. Alright, now let's look at cases where the pawn is on the 7th rank. So it's only one square away from becoming a queen. So in this case, you're not going to be able to get your queen down to the queening square. What you want to do is force the opposing king to move there. And once you do that, then you can move your king one step closer. Okay? And then you'll repeat the process over and over again, eventually moving your king all the way down the board and assisting with the queen. Okay? So let's say we move the queen to c1, check. Now if black has to move to f2. If he moves, say, to f3, you'll just move your queen to e1, blocking the pawn, and the rest will be easy. So black has to move to f2. Okay. Let's say you go here, f4, check. Now there's different ways of doing this, so let's just show you one to start with. Okay. Now here you don't actually have to check. You can just move here. So black can't promote to a queen yet. So black has to move down to f1, and then you can finally force the black king to move to e1. He can't move to g1 here because you'll take the pawn, so black is forced to block his own pawn. Now you can finally move your king closer. Okay, so that's one step, and then you just repeat the process. Okay, so check. Eventually you want to check and then get your queen to the 6th rank. Well, your 3rd rank, his 6th rank. So that you can eventually do that same trick of forcing him to block his own pawn. And then you can move your king one step closer. Okay. So another way of doing it, instead of checking in this position, is to move your queen to d2. So black can't move the pawn to e1 because it's pinned. So let's say black moves to f1, and then you can go check and do kind of the same thing we saw earlier. Okay, again, queen to f3, forcing the king to block his own pawn. Okay, okay, we're almost there. We'll just need to do it one more time. Okay, now we're getting closer. Now because our king is so close, we can actually move our queen to f3 because it's protected by the king. Okay. Now, if since our king and queen are so close now, we have to start worrying about stalemate. Now we can move our king to d3 in this position because black can move the king to d1. If this pawn were not here, moving the king to d3 would be stalemate. Okay, but because the pawn is there, we're okay. So we move there, black is forced to move to d1, and then we can take the pawn. And checkmate follows one move later. Okay, so there were a lot of moves involved in getting to this place, but you could see the process involved in getting there. It's not too difficult. Okay, so let's look at the case of the rook pawn. Okay, so the pawn is on the 7th rank, but it's a rook pawn. So is that any different than what we just saw? Well, let's try to do the same thing. Can we do the same thing? Let's say we go check. Uh-oh. So, alright, we forced black to move his king in front of his own pawn, which is what we were trying to do before, but now, if we were to move our king anywhere, closer, or anywhere actually, then that would be stalemate. Because black can't move the pawn, and he can't move the king to b1 or b2. and if we just check, it'll just move the king over, and it'll just basically just move the king back and forth, and there's nothing we can do to make any progress. Our king will never be able to move close enough to help. So in this position, it's a draw. So let's look at one more case, which is the bishop pawn, which is a pawn on the c file or f file. Okay, so this doesn't look any different than the position we saw earlier where the pawn was on e2, right? We should be able to win this, you would think. But actually, the answer is no. And you'll see why. So if you're black, you should learn how to play this position as well. If you're black, what you want to do is move your king into the corner. And the corner closest to your pawn. So if your pawn were on f2, you'd want to move to g1 and h1. Since your pawn here is on c2, you want to move your king over to b1 and a1. Okay, so you just move over there. Okay, and so you might have to move in front of your pawn once, and white can make progress, moving the king a little closer. But that's it. After that, you should never have to move your king in front of your own pawn. Okay, white might think it's making progress, but you just move to the corner, and then if he ever actually takes the pawn, stalemate. Okay, so that's kind of the trick you have to know. And if you're black, you should know how to take advantage of that. So those are some of the positions of queen versus pawn. I hope you've learned how to play them all correctly. Thanks for watching.